Look at her again, sleeping during office hours.
That morning, laughter echoed across the office, not because someone had told a joke, not because something funny had happened. The laughter was directed at one person, Grace. Once again, she had fallen asleep at her desk, her head resting on her folded arms while exhaustion completely took over her body. Several employees gathered around her workstation. Some shook their heads, others laughed openly. Then came Amara, the woman everyone believed was Grace's closest friend. A smile slowly appeared on her face, not a kind smile, not a concerned smile, but the smile of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. She quietly pulled out her phone, pressed record, and began filming Grace. The sleeping woman had no idea that her humiliation was about to become public. "Look at her again, sleeping during office hours," Amara whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. The workers laughed even harder. Some began making cruel comments, while others moved closer so they could appear in the video. Within minutes, Amara uploaded the footage to the company's group chat. The reaction was immediate. Comments flooded in. The mockery spread across the office like wildfire. Somewhere inside the building, Grace's future seemed to be collapsing before her eyes, but nobody knew the truth. Nobody knew why she was always tired, nobody knew the sacrifices she made every single night, and nobody knew that before this day ended, the same people laughing at her would witness something that would leave them completely speechless forever. Before we continue, kindly subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications to support our mission of bringing you powerful and inspiring stories. Now let's begin. Years earlier, Grace was born into what seemed like a happy and loving family. Her father and mother were legally married, and in those early years, their home was filled with laughter, peace, and hope for the future. Grace grew up believing that nothing could ever separate her family. When her younger sister was born a few years later, the joy in the house only increased. Her mother loved both daughters deeply, and their father appeared proud of them. For a while, life remained beautiful, but as the years passed, certain voices began creeping into their home. At family gatherings, relatives would smile at first, then ask questions that carried hidden poison. "So, when are you giving us a son?" one aunt would ask. Another would laugh and say, "2 daughters are nice, but who will carry the family name?" Sometimes, an uncle would shake his head and tell Grace's father, "A man without a son is building for another family." At first, Grace's father would laugh and ignore them. "My children are my children," he would reply. But the questions never stopped. Every celebration became another opportunity for criticism. Every visit from relatives became another lecture. Slowly, the pressure began to change him. Grace often saw her mother sitting quietly after family gatherings, her eyes filled with sadness. One evening, Grace overheard her parents talking after they thought the children were asleep. "What do they want me to do?" her mother asked softly, her voice trembling. "Did I choose the children God gave us?" Her father remained silent for a long moment before replying. "You know how my family thinks." "And what about how you think?" her mother asked. "Are our daughters not enough?" Her father did not answer immediately. The silence that followed frightened Grace more than any argument. As months turned into years, the insults grew worse. Some relatives stopped hiding their opinions. They openly blamed Grace's mother for not having a son. Whenever Grace saw her mother wipe away tears in secret, her young heart broke. She did not fully understand what was happening, but she knew her mother was hurting. Then, one morning, everything changed. Grace still remembered that day as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. The atmosphere in the house felt strange. Her father looked distant. Her mother looked worried. There was a suitcase near the door. Grace watched as her parents stood facing each other in silence. Finally, her mother spoke. "Are you really doing this?" she asked, tears filling her eyes. Her father's face remained cold. "I have made my decision." "What about your daughters?" she cried. "What about this family?" He looked away. "I need a son." Those 4 words struck her mother like a physical blow. Little Grace stood frozen in a corner, unable to understand why her father was saying such things. Her younger sister clung to her mother's wrapper, confused and frightened. "So after everything, you are throwing us away because we are not sons?" her mother asked. Her father said nothing. The silence was answer enough. Then he picked up his bag and walked toward the door. "Daddy," little Grace called out, her voice shaking. He paused briefly but never turned around. "Daddy, where are you going?" Tears filled her eyes as she ran toward him. "Daddy, please don't go." But he walked out without answering. The door closed behind him, and with that sound, the family Grace had always known shattered into pieces. The house suddenly felt empty. Her mother's quiet sobs filled the room. Her younger sister started crying because she saw everyone else crying. Grace stood there in shock, staring at the closed door, waiting for her father to come back. But he never did. Days later, they learned that he had married another woman, a woman he believed would give him the son he desperately wanted. From that moment forward, life became a daily struggle. The man who once provided for them stopped caring about their welfare. The burden of survival fell entirely on Grace's mother. And for the first time, Grace began to understand that some wounds do not come from strangers. Sometimes they come from the people who are supposed to love you the most. After Grace's father abandoned the family, many people expected her mother to break under the weight of disappointment. Some even whispered that a woman raising 2 daughters alone would never survive. But Grace's mother refused to surrender. She cried, yes. She mourned the family she had lost, yes. But she refused to allow her pain to destroy her children. One evening, after putting the girls to bed, she sat quietly and wiped away her tears. Then she looked at herself and said, "If nobody is coming to save us, then I must save us myself." The next morning, she began a small food business. It was not much, but it was all she had. Every day became a struggle. Every coin mattered. Every customer mattered. Some days she sold enough food to buy what the family needed. Other days she returned home with unsold food and a heavy heart. Yet she never gave up. Many nights there wasn't enough money. There were evenings when she sat alone calculating expenses and quietly wondering how she would pay school fees. Sometimes Grace would wake up in the middle of the night and find her mother staring into space. "Mama, are you okay?" she would ask. Her mother would force a smile and pull her close. "I am fine, my daughter." "Why are you crying?" "These are not tears of sadness," her mother would lie gently. "Sometimes mothers cry when they are praying for their children." Grace was still young, but she knew her mother was carrying burdens too heavy for one person. As the years passed, she watched her mother suffer in ways many people never saw. She watched her walk through illness. On days when fever made her body weak, she still woke up before sunrise. She watched her walk through exhaustion. Even when her legs ached and her back hurt, she continued serving customers. She watched her walk through disappointment. Whenever business was poor, her mother would simply pray and begin again the next day. One evening, after returning from school, Grace found her mother sitting outside looking unusually tired. "Mama, you should rest," she said softly. Her mother smiled. "If I rest too long, who will take care of my daughters?" Grace sat beside her and held her hand. "One day, I will take care of you." Her mother laughed gently. "You are still a child." "No, Mama, I mean it. One day you will not suffer like this anymore." Her mother looked into her eyes and saw a determination far beyond her years. "Then study hard. Education is something nobody can take away from you." From that day, Grace carried those words deep inside her heart. She made a promise to herself. One day she would change their lives. One day her mother would rest. One day all the suffering would end. That promise became her motivation. Whenever other students were playing, Grace was studying. Whenever people tried to distract her, she stayed focused. She knew what was waiting for her at home. She knew what her mother sacrificed every day. Failure was not an option. Years later, all her hard work paid off when she graduated from university. The day she received her certificate, her mother cried tears of joy. She hugged Grace tightly and said, "Your father may have abandoned us, but look at what God has done." Grace smiled through her own tears. "This is only the beginning, Mama. I will make your life better." But graduation did not immediately solve their problems. The family was still struggling financially. Jobs were difficult to find, bills continued to arrive, responsibilities continued to grow. So instead of sitting at home waiting for opportunities, Grace joined her mother in the food business while searching for employment. Every day they worked side by side, mother and daughter, fighting the same battle together. Little did Grace know that her breakthrough was approaching. Long before that breakthrough arrived, there was someone who had been part of her life for many years. Her name was Amara. The two girls had grown up together. People often believed they were sisters because they were almost always together. Grace certainly saw Amara as family. She trusted her completely, shared everything with her, helped her whenever she could. Grace's mother loved Amara too. Whenever Amara visited, she was welcomed warmly. Sometimes Grace's mother would even tell people, "I have 3 daughters, not 2." Grace never imagined there could be anything wrong between them. But while Grace saw friendship, Amara saw competition. Deep inside, Amara envied everything about Grace. She envied her intelligence, she envied her beauty, she envied her kindness. She envied how people naturally respected and liked her. Every achievement Grace celebrated felt like a painful reminder of what Amara believed she lacked. Yet Grace never noticed any of this. Whenever she succeeded, she shared her happiness with Amara. Whenever Amara needed help, Grace offered it freely. She loved her friend sincerely, never realizing that jealousy was slowly poisoning Amara's heart. Then one day, everything seemed to change for the better. Grace heard about a job opening. Her excitement was immediate. The first person she thought about was Amara. She quickly called her. "Amara, I just heard about an opportunity." "What opportunity?" Amara asked. "A job opening. If we prepare well, we can both get in." "Really?" "Yes. Let's study together." And so they did. Day after day, they prepared side by side. They encouraged each other, supported each other. Finally, the interview day arrived. Weeks later, the results came out. Both women had been hired. Grace screamed with joy the moment she received the news. She called Amara immediately. "We did it!" she shouted excitedly. "Can you believe it?" "Yes," Amara replied with a forced laugh. "We did it." Grace was overjoyed. She believed their lives were finally changing for the better. She believed she and her closest friend would begin a beautiful new chapter together. But while Grace celebrated with gratitude and hope, Amara smiled on the outside and hid her true feelings inside, because instead of disappearing, her jealousy had only grown stronger than ever. Getting the job felt like the answer to years of prayers. The day Grace received her employment letter, she ran home with tears of joy in her eyes. Her mother hugged her tightly and thanked God over and over again. "Our suffering is finally coming to an end," her mother said. Grace smiled and held her mother's hands. "Not immediately, Mama, but I promise you, things will get better. Soon you will not have to work this hard anymore." But life had a way of testing people before blessing them fully. Although Grace now had a job, her salary had not started coming in. The family still depended on the small food business to survive. So every evening after work, while many of her colleagues were resting, watching television, or spending time with friends, Grace was heading straight home to begin another shift of work. The moment she arrived, she would quickly change her clothes and join her mother. Together, they prepared ingredients, washed vegetables, measured spices, cooked large pots of food, packed orders, and organized supplies for the next day. Sometimes her younger sister helped too, but most of the burden rested on Grace and her mother. Night after night, the routine continued. While the rest of the neighborhood slept peacefully, the small kitchen remained alive with activity. Pots boiled, spoons stirred, steam filled the air. Sometimes her mother would look at Grace and say, "My daughter, go and rest for a while." Grace would shake her head. "No, Mama. The faster we finish, the sooner you can sleep too." Her mother would sigh. "You already worked all day." "And you worked all your life for us," Grace would reply with a smile. "Now it's my turn to help." Many times, they worked until their eyes became heavy from exhaustion. Yet they continued because they had no choice. Bills had to be paid, food had to be bought. Her younger sister's education had to continue. When dawn finally arrived, their work was still not over. Grace would help her mother transport supplies and arrange everything for the day's sales. Only after making sure her mother was settled would she rush home, bathe quickly, change into office clothes, and hurry to work. By the time she arrived at the office each morning, her body felt as though it had already completed an entire day's labor. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. Her muscles ached. Sometimes, she silently prayed while sitting at her desk, "God, please help me stay awake today." Most days, she fought sleep with everything she had. She drank water, she stood up occasionally, she washed her face in the restroom, she forced herself to focus on work. Sometimes she succeeded, sometimes she failed. And whenever she failed, someone was always watching. Amara. Instead of helping her friend, Amara saw an opportunity. She knew exactly why Grace was always tired. She had known Grace's struggles since childhood. She knew about the food business, she knew about the sleepless nights, she knew about the sacrifices. Yet she said nothing. Instead, she created stories. Whenever employees asked questions, Amara would lower her voice and pretend to be sharing a secret. "You know that's not ordinary tiredness, right?" she would say. Curious coworkers would ask, "Then what is it?" Amara would shrug dramatically. "Let's just say some people have very busy nights." The listeners would laugh.
Others would lean closer. "What do you mean?" someone would ask. Amara would smile. "I'm sure you can figure it out." Soon rumors began spreading across the office. People whispered whenever Grace walked past. Some stared at her. Others laughed quietly. A few even made jokes. Grace noticed the strange behavior but could not understand where it was coming from. She often asked herself, "Why are people looking at me like that?" But no one told her the truth. No one told her that someone she considered a sister was slowly destroying her reputation behind her back. Then came the day everything exploded. That morning, exhaustion finally defeated her once again. Grace had barely slept after another long night of helping her mother prepare food. The moment she sat at her desk, sleep overtook her. While she rested unknowingly, Amara saw her chance. She quickly pulled out her phone and began recording. "Look at her," she said loudly enough for nearby employees to hear, "sleeping again during office hours." Laughter spread immediately. Some workers gathered around, others joined in the mockery. Within minutes, Amara uploaded the video to the company group chat. Then she sat comfortably and watched the reactions arrive. The comments became increasingly cruel. People mocked Grace openly. Some insulted her, others joked about her. The video spread so quickly that management soon became aware of it. Not long afterward, a message arrived. Grace had been summoned by the directors. The moment she read it, her heart nearly stopped. Fear rushed through her entire body. This job meant everything. It was the hope her family had been waiting for. Without it, all their sacrifices would feel wasted. Fighting back tears, she stood from her desk and walked toward Amara. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Why would you do this?" Amara looked at her without a trace of guilt. "Do what?" she asked coldly. "You know exactly what you did," Grace replied quietly. "You know how important this job is to me." Amara laughed, not the laughter of a friend, not the laughter of someone who cared. It was the laughter of someone enjoying another person's pain. Grace stared at her in disbelief. The cruelty in Amara's eyes felt like a knife cutting through years of friendship. Then Amara finally said what she had hidden in her heart for years. "You always think you're better than everyone." Grace blinked in shock. "What?" "You had me," Amara replied. "Always the smartest, always the favorite, always the one people admire." Grace shook her head slowly. "Amara, I never." But Amara interrupted her. "Save it, and make sure you've cleared your desk." Grace felt her stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" Amara smiled smugly. "You're leaving today." For a moment, Grace could barely recognize the woman standing in front of her. This was someone she had loved like a sister, someone she had trusted, someone she had helped. Yet standing before her now was a complete stranger. The betrayal hurt far more than the public humiliation. But there was no time to cry, no time to argue, no time to process the pain. The meeting was waiting, and somewhere behind those closed doors, her future was about to be decided.
With a heavy heart and trembling hands, Grace walked slowly toward the meeting room. Every step felt heavier than the last. Her mind was filled with fear. She kept wondering what she would tell her mother if she lost the job. She thought about the endless nights they spent cooking together. She thought about her younger sister's education. She thought about all the sacrifices they had made to reach this point. As she stood before the door, she took a deep breath and whispered a short prayer. "God, whatever happens today, please give me strength." Then she gently pushed the door open and stepped inside. Immediately, she froze. The directors were already seated around the large table. Their expressions were serious. But they were not alone. Sitting among them was someone she never expected to see. The CEO himself, the most powerful person in the company. Grace nearly lost her balance. Her heart began pounding so loudly she could almost hear it. She had seen the CEO before during company events, but never this close. Certainly not in a meeting called because of her misconduct. For a brief moment, she felt her knees weaken. "Good morning, sir," she said nervously. "Good morning," one of the directors replied. "Please have a seat." Grace sat down carefully. The atmosphere in the room was tense. Everyone seemed to be watching her. The silence alone was enough to make her uncomfortable. Then, the questioning began. One of the directors adjusted his glasses and looked directly at her. "Grace, this is not the first time we have received complaints about you sleeping during work hours." Grace lowered her head immediately. "I am sorry, sir." Another director spoke. "Do you understand how serious this is?" "Yes, sir." "Why do you keep sleeping at work?" Grace swallowed hard. Tears were already forming in her eyes. "I am sorry, sir. It won't happen again." "That is not what we asked," another director said. "Why does it keep happening?" Grace felt ashamed. She accepted responsibility. She apologized repeatedly. She promised to improve. "Please give me another chance," she pleaded softly. "I know I have made mistakes. I promise I will do better." The directors exchanged glances. Then suddenly, something unexpected happened. The CEO, who had remained silent the entire time, raised his hand slightly. Immediately, the room became quiet. Every director turned toward him. Grace slowly lifted her eyes. The CEO leaned forward in his chair. His voice was calm but serious. "I don't want excuses." The room remained silent. Then he spoke again. "I want the truth." Several directors looked surprised. It was clear they had not expected him to intervene personally. The CEO kept his eyes fixed on Grace. "Young lady, look at me." Grace slowly raised her head. "Tell me the truth. Why do you keep falling asleep during work hours?" Grace hesitated. For years, she had learned to carry her burdens quietly. She never liked talking about her struggles. But something in the CEO's voice made her feel safe enough to speak honestly. For the first time, she decided to tell the complete truth. Her voice trembled as she began. Sir, I don't sleep because I don't care about my job. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I sleep because I am tired. Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. The room listened. Grace continued.
She spoke about her father abandoning the family years earlier because her mother did not give birth to a son. She spoke about the pain that followed. She spoke about watching her mother struggle to raise 2 daughters alone. Then she talked about the small food business. Every evening after work, I go home and help my mother prepare food, she explained. We cook through the night. We prepare ingredients, we pack orders, we organize supplies. Her voice broke. Sometimes we barely sleep. One director frowned. Every night? Grace nodded. Almost every night, sir. Another director asked quietly, why don't you hire workers? Grace gave a sad smile. Because we cannot afford workers. The room fell silent again. She continued speaking. She told them how her mother worked through sickness and exhaustion. She described the endless sacrifices her mother had made for her and her younger sister. Then she wiped away tears and said something that touched everyone present. My dream was to keep this job long enough to help my mother rest. She has suffered all her life for us. I promised myself that one day she would no longer have to struggle like this. Her voice cracked completely. That is why I work at night. That is why I come here tired. I never wanted to disrespect this company. I was simply trying to help my family survive. By the time she finished speaking, tears were flowing freely down her face. The room became completely silent. Some directors looked emotional. One of them quietly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Another simply stared at the table. Nobody seemed prepared for the story they had just heard. For several seconds, nobody said a single word. Then the CEO slowly reached for his phone. Without explaining anything, he made a series of calls. He spoke calmly and gave instructions to security personnel. Grace listened nervously but could not hear every detail. Then she realized what was happening. The CEO was verifying her story. Security officers were dispatched to the location she had mentioned. They were instructed to confirm whether her mother truly operated the food business she described. As soon as the calls ended, another period of silence began. Minutes felt like hours. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Grace sat nervously in her chair. Her hands were shaking. She knew she had told the truth, but she was still afraid. Across the room, the directors waited patiently. The CEO remained calm and expressionless. The clock on the wall seemed louder than ever. Tick, tick, tick. Finally, a phone rang. Every head turned instantly toward the CEO. He answered and listened quietly. Nobody could read his expression. The room became so silent that even breathing seemed loud. Then the call ended. The verification was complete. Everything Grace had said was true. Every single word. Her mother operated the food business exactly where Grace had described. The long nights, the hard work, the sacrifices, all of it was real. Once again, silence filled the room. But this time, it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of people whose hearts had just been changed by the truth. And what happened next would leave everyone in that room completely stunned. The silence in the meeting room continued for a few seconds after the CEO ended the call. Then, slowly, he stood up from his seat. Every eye in the room followed him. Grace's heart pounded nervously. She still believed she was about to lose everything. The CEO looked directly at her and spoke calmly. Grace, this company does not punish people for being hardworking. It rewards them. Grace blinked in confusion. She wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. Then the CEO continued. Effective immediately, you are being promoted. The room erupted with surprise.
Several directors looked at one another in disbelief. Before Grace could even react, the CEO continued speaking. You will receive a company house, a company vehicle, a substantial allowance, additional benefits, and greater responsibilities. Grace felt as if the room was spinning. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Just minutes earlier, she had been preparing herself for dismissal. Now she was hearing words she never imagined possible. Tears immediately streamed down her face. Unable to control her emotions, she fell to her knees. "Thank you, sir," she cried. "Thank you so much." She lifted her eyes toward heaven. "Thank you, God. Thank you." The directors began applauding. Many of them had always admired Grace's work ethic and dedication. They knew she was one of the company's best employees. Now her years of sacrifice were finally being rewarded. The CEO smiled gently. "Stand up, Grace. You've earned this." Meanwhile, outside the meeting room, news of the promotion spread quickly through the office, and when Amara heard what had happened, she sat frozen in shock. The very trap she had designed to destroy Grace had become the doorway to Grace's greatest breakthrough. She could hardly believe it. In the days that followed, Amara repeatedly tried to reconnect. She approached Grace during lunch breaks, she greeted her warmly in the hallways, she tried to act as though nothing had happened. One afternoon, she finally said, "Grace, I think we should move past everything and be friends again." Grace looked at her quietly for a moment. There was no anger in her eyes, no bitterness, no desire for revenge, only wisdom. "Amara," she said gently, "I have forgiven you." Relief immediately appeared on Amara's face. But Grace continued, "Forgiveness and trust are not always the same thing." The smile slowly disappeared from Amara's face. Grace remained calm and respectful. "You are like a sister to me. What hurt me most was not the video, it was knowing that someone I loved could do that to me." Amara lowered her head in shame. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Grace nodded. "I believe you are, and I wish you well, but some wounds heal with scars." From that day forward, Grace remained polite, professional, and respectful, but she kept her distance. The friendship was over. Not because she hated Amara, but because she had learned an important lesson. Trust, once broken, cannot simply be rebuilt with words. And sometimes the greatest form of peace is creating healthy boundaries and moving forward with wisdom. When Grace returned home that evening and told her mother everything that had happened, the older woman could not hold back her tears. She sat down slowly and covered her face as tears rolled freely down her cheeks. For several moments, she could not even speak. All the years of suffering, all the sleepless nights, all the sacrifices she had made for her daughters came rushing back at once. Then she lifted her eyes toward heaven and said repeatedly, "Thank you, God. Thank you, God. You have remembered us at last." Grace knelt beside her mother and held her hands. Both women cried together, not because of pain this time, but because of relief. After a while, her mother gently wiped her tears and looked at Grace. "My daughter, there is something I want you to remember." Grace nodded. "What is it, Mama?" Her mother sighed softly. "Forgive Amara." Grace was silent. "Forgive her," her mother repeated. "Do not carry hatred in your heart. God has already fought this battle for you." Then she added wisely, "But keep your distance. Not everyone who grows up with you is meant to continue the journey with you." Grace nodded slowly. "I understand, Mama." As the months passed, life transformed completely. The CEO kept his promise. He became more than a boss to Grace. He became a mentor. Sometimes he would call her into his office simply to advise her. "You have a gift," he once told her. "Never allow success to change your character." Grace listened carefully and continued working hard. Soon she began traveling for important business meetings and company negotiations. Everywhere she went, she delivered outstanding results. Deal after deal was successfully completed. Project after project exceeded expectations. Her reputation continued growing within the company. Promotions followed, more opportunities came, more responsibilities arrived, and Grace handled them all with humility and excellence. Yet despite her success, she never forgot the promise she made to her mother years earlier. One afternoon, she drove her mother to a large building. Her mother looked around in confusion. "Why are we here?" Grace smiled. "Come inside, Mama." When they entered, her mother noticed a fully furnished eatery with modern equipment and plenty of space. She turned toward Grace in surprise. "Whose place is this?" Tears filled Grace's eyes. "Yours, Mama." The older woman froze. "Mine?" Grace nodded. "You worked your whole life for us. Now it is my turn to take care of you." Her mother burst into tears. Soon, workers were hired, the business expanded, customers increased. For the first time in many years, Grace's mother no longer had to wake up in the middle of every night to struggle alone. She could finally rest. Meanwhile, Grace's younger sister completed her university education successfully. Proud of the family business, she decided to join her mother and help manage the growing enterprise. Slowly, the family that had once struggled to survive found stability, happiness, and peace. For the first time in many years, there was laughter without fear. There was food without worry. There was hope without uncertainty. Their years of suffering seemed like a distant memory. Then, years later, news of their success reached someone they had not heard from in a very long time: Grace's father.
People told him how successful his daughters had become. They told him about Grace's achievements. They told him about the thriving business. They told him about the respect the family now enjoyed. At the same time, the sons he had abandoned them to pursue had become a source of constant disappointment. They were irresponsible, difficult, troubled. The future he had imagined never arrived. Regret slowly consumed him. Many nights he sat alone thinking about the family he had abandoned. Eventually, unable to carry the guilt any longer, he decided to return. The man who arrived at their door years later looked very different from the man who had walked away. He was older, weaker, humbled by life. When Grace opened the door and saw him standing there, she barely recognized him. Her mother and sister soon joined her. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then tears filled the old man's eyes. "I have come to apologize," he said quietly. His voice trembled with emotion. "I made terrible mistakes." He turned toward his former wife. "Please forgive me." Then he looked at Grace and her sister. "Forgive me, my daughters. I failed you." Tears rolled down his cheeks. "I thought I was chasing a better future, but I destroyed the best thing I ever had." The room remained silent. Finally, Grace's mother spoke. "What you did hurt us deeply." He lowered his head in shame. Grace looked at her sister before speaking. "We forgive you." The old man broke down completely. Years of guilt poured out through tears. But forgiveness did not change everything. It removed the bitterness. It healed old wounds. Yet it could not erase the consequences of his choices. Grace's mother spoke gently but firmly. "We forgive you, but we cannot return to the past." Grace nodded. Some doors close for a reason. Her father understood. He had lost the right to be part of their lives long ago. The door to forgiveness opened, but the door back into their family remained closed. Some consequences cannot be reversed. And so, Grace's story became a lesson to everyone who heard it. The woman mocked for sleeping at work became one of the company's greatest success stories. The friend who tried to destroy her became a reminder that jealousy can poison even the closest relationships. The father who abandoned his daughters became a warning about favoritism and poor choices. And the mother who refused to give up became a shining example of unconditional love, sacrifice, and perseverance. Years later, Grace would sometimes sit quietly and reflect on her journey. She would remember the nights without sleep, the days of struggle,
the humiliation, the tears. And she would smile because she had learned something powerful. The same day people tried to bring her down was the day God chose to lift her up. What others meant for shame became the beginning of her breakthrough. And at long last, after years of pain, sacrifice, disappointment, and struggle, the reward finally came. Their suffering had not been wasted. Their tears had not been forgotten. And their story proved that no matter how long the night may seem, morning eventually comes for those who refuse to give up.